Bill Carroll, Zennie62 Media. So, thrown a little bit off track on 32 teams to 30 games, at least in part because of the amazing Michelle Indigo-Cello. The concert I saw was incredible. And I highly recommend, if you haven't had a chance to see her live, please do so. She is an incredibly talented and giving performer. And I may post some videos from that at some point. But back to the lesson at hand. Perfection is perfected, so I'm glad I'm moving on. So, I'm going to start with the Falcons today. And the Falcons are a team that has, it wasn't that long ago, right, was playing in the Super Bowl. And should have won the Super Bowl, but once again, hold the video. The Falcons then rather rapidly fell into, as sometimes do after, coming so close, into a bit of a malaise, and they've restructured the team pretty much entirely. So I'm going to start with the 2020 depth chart, which was Matt Ryan and Matt Schaub, the two Matts. Starting at top of the quarterback depth chart, with, of course, the X, the future Hall of Famer in Julio Jones, backed up by Christian Blake. They had Calvin Ridley, who was seen as a budding star, with Olamide Zaccheaus, who was a really good special teams player and a guy that you could bring on in your four wide receiver sets. Russell Gage as your possession Z. Then they had Hayden Hurst, who was seen as a matchup problem at tight end, and a guy who moved well. Was an older prospect coming up because he spent time playing minor league baseball. You had Jaden Graham backing him up, along with Luke Stocker, who was a solid blocker. Stocker the blocker. They hoped to catch lightning in a microfracture bottle with end-of-career Todd Gurley, and I don't have to tell you that story ended. They had Brian Hill, who I really liked, and Ito Smith, who I also really liked coming out. Southern Miss, Ito Smith, and Wyoming's Brian Hill were both guys I believed in. And they had moments in their careers there with the Falcons, but neither showed they could be the guy fully, though Hill had some very good games. When Gurley showed he could no longer really be Todd Gurley anymore, unfortunately. Their left tackle depth chart was Jake Matthews and Matt Gono. They had James Carpenter and Matt Hennessy at guard. And then the very talented Alex Mack, who I think was really the key to that offensive line to some extent at center, with Justin McCray backing him up. Chris Lindstrom and Timon Paris. Well, Timon Paris backed up both tackle and guard, but you had Chris Lindstrom and then Caleb McCary with Timon Paris, along with the aforementioned Mr. Hennessy, guys that played, depending on what was going on, either tackle or guard, backed up both tackle and guard for them. Most teams carry, especially on game day, they only have 7 offensive linemen dressed, 8 at the most, so you need guys with versatility. Their pass rushers were Tack McKinley, who I had concerns about coming out. He wasn't as productive as you would like, and I'm not talking necessarily about things like tackles for loss and sacks, which people focus on maybe a little too much. Still the greatest, if you're looking for a cheat code in finding players, even at the defensive end spot, even at corner, even at linebacker. People understand when you say solo tackle market share at linebacker, they think, oh yeah, finding the football. That matters at every defensive position. Guys who make solo tackles and make a dominant level of solo tackles virtually never fail, no matter what position. Whole other show on that. So, Alan Bailey, who is a fascinating prospect just because of his size and athletic ability, but never put together in college at Miami, and not so much never in the pros either. Charles Harris was another guy who was highly rated, who I had concerns about for the same reason I had concerns about Tack McKinley, lack of production. Then you have Grady Jarrett, who I think is frankly underrated. Marlon Davidson, of course, who came there via draft that same year. Dedrin Senat, USF guy that I liked coming out, but is more of a depth piece than a full-time starter. Taylor Davidson, Fresno State, a guy that I liked coming out. John Comiskey, I was surprised to see him listed at tackle because he was such an athlete and played mostly. He was a stand-up pass rusher at times in college, and a Division II prospect that I really liked. They had 2 guys at Charleston at the time that I was huge fans of: Michael Strahan, who's still in the league, and of course Comiskey. And both those guys were freaks. It's like they had these. It's like, how did these guys end up there? But that's a whole other show too. Then Dante Fowler Jr. Dante Fowler Jr. was another guy that both a combination of his injury history and, you guessed it, lack of solo tackle market share made me concerned about him coming out. They had Steven Means, who was another sort of interesting high ceiling, low floor prospect, and Jacob Tweedy Mariner behind him. And then after Tweedy Mariner, on the defensive line, you had an interesting linebacker core of athletes. Deion Jones and Fole Oluokun are both tremendously athletic. I mean, these are talking about guys that run like faster than probably 70% of the safeties in the NFL. With Leroy Reynolds and Michael Walker, who I liked coming out also. So it's a solid, small-ish, but solid group of linebackers. A.J. Terrell, they hit on that draft pick, starting at corner, right out of the box as a rookie with Dirk Reznard, Bleedy Ray Wilson. Bleedy Ray! As we all remember Deion referring to him when he was at the Combine out of UConn. Then Isaiah Oliver, who I liked coming out of Colorado. Kendall Sheffield, who's, sort of a really good athlete, but a guy that gets bounced around. He can be overpowered at the catch point by strong receivers, and we've seen that in his NFL career. But also Ricardo Allen and Sherrod Newman at safety. Keanu Neal, the sort of last of a dying breed of the hammer safeties, who I guess I've seen at times listed as a linebacker for teams he's played for since, including with the Cowboys. Jalen Hawkins, who I really liked coming out, and I think is going to be a really good player. And then Devontae Casey, who I really liked coming out. I mean, he was on my all underappreciated team twice. A handful of players have been on my all underappreciated team twice, usually because they play their way off of it, usually when a guy is really good but underappreciated, eventually people find him. Not so much with Devontae Casey, in my opinion. I think he was always underrated. I still like him. Young Hova, Young Wei Koo, who, shout out to Young Wei Koo, won me a fantasy Super Bowl a couple of seasons back. So thank you for that. had a monster run during the fantasy playoffs for me. Sterling Hoffrichter, excuse me, at punter, Josh Harris, long snapper, the aforementioned Olamide Zaccheaus and Brandon Powell, wide receiver / return men, and Hoffrichter and like I said, Hoffrichter also was the holder. I'm going to compare that to the current depth chart. Now, once again, it's bloated, swollen, whatever term you use, because they haven't had to make cuts yet. But you have at your X, while he may not be Julio Jones and a future Hall of Famer, a player I really, really like in Drake London. And I called him in my scouting reports on him. Now, this is going to age me. That's how old I am. I called him Mike Evans, 33 1/3 RPMs. If you're too old to have owned a record player, that means nothing to you. And then Frank Darby from Arizona State. Behind him, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who, of course, did not do well in his time in Philadelphia, but I think is in a good situation to be a back. I mean, first of all, there's situations in like red zone. You toss him, Drake London, right? You toss Kyle Pitts, you split him out, Jono Smith, right? Mac Hollins, right? You go 5 wide with nobody's less than 6'2.5", and play a little basketball at that point. So I think that would be interesting if you did that. Aforementioned Mac Hollins, who another former member of my all underappreciated team, was actually a track athlete who was really more recruited by some track programs, became a football player, a guy who improved every year at Carolina when he was a Tar Heel, and now has turned himself a wide receiver 2/3 at the NFL level, which is what I saw in him, and others maybe did not, but other people thought he was just going to be a special teamer too. So, Cardell Hodge still hanging out there, or say still back, I guess, in his case. But by way of Detroit, there's an unrestricted free agent. And then Penny Hart is backing up Scotty Miller, right? Former Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the slot. The Caucasian speedster, White Lightning, all those cool nicknames. I remember Roger Carr being called White Lightning back in the day. White people can run too. I see people automatically moving white cornerbacks to safety. Don't do that to Riley Moss, people. But once again, another show. Keep going. And then behind them, depth-wise, Josh Ali, Keelan Harris are fighting it out to try to land a couple of spots with Slade Bolden, undrafted free agent from Alabama, who has a shot to stick in the slot. And a guy I really like, college free agent I really like. Remember this name. If you were looking for a surprise who might stick there, it's Xavier Malone. Really productive, really athletic, smaller school prospect. And then I think they did really good work in the draft. Matthew Bergeron's already penciled in at left guard. I think he's a future tackle. But he and Jake Matthews, another good draft pick, sticking it out there, been there since 2014, came in the first round. Behind Matthews, you have Ethan Greenridge, you have Wesley Berry. Bergeron, like I said, penciled a star ahead of Matt Hennessy, who once again was drafted in the 2020 draft, which we just talked about. We'll talk about more in a second. And then Ryan Niesel after that. Then you have Drew Dahlman, who I liked when he was coming out of Stanford. Javon Gwynn, who was just drafted in the 7th round behind him. And then Jonathan Harrison, who came by way of San Francisco, who may or may not make the team. Kyle Hinton is another guy who's got a shot to stick at guard, may or may not make the team. And then you've got Chris Lindstrom. There we go, still going strong. From part of that 2019 draft class. Jalen Mayfield behind him. Justin Saper behind him. Then Caleb McGarry, standing strong. Another guy from that 2019 draft class with Joshua Miles, who I liked coming out, a small school kid. With Tyler Vrabel, yes, that Tyler Vrabel, who I think looked like a professional wrestler. If you watched the distance draft, the year that they had to do it, during the COVID-19 draft year, and you saw the Vrabel family literally looking like they were going to cut a wrestling promo at points. But yeah, he at that time I think was sporting like a faux hawk maybe. But yeah, he's hanging around as an undrafted college free agent, second year in the league. Of course, tight end Kyle Pitts, Geno Smith, Parker Hesse, and former Arkansas quarterback Felipe Franks trying to do the Logan Thomas thing is a fight as a former college undrafted free agent trying to stick around. And they've got John Fitzpatrick and Tucker Fisk. Those are guys that, if they make it, are probably practice squatters. My assumption is they'll keep 3 tight ends with Hesse and Franks really battling it out for that 3rd spot. Of course, the quarterback right now is Desmond Ridder with Taylor Heineke. That's an interesting situation. I obviously, once again, another former member of my all underappreciated team. By his junior year of college at Old Dominion, I was one of those people sort of bigging up Taylor Heineke. I called him Case Keenum with the Rally Sports Package, is what I called it. That was my little thumbnail scouting report on him. And I think I'm right. I think he's basically a more fun, off-road version of Case Keenum. And then you've got Logan Whiteside, another guy I really like coming out, another one of my form. So every single one of the quarterbacks on their roster has been on one of my teams. Desmond Ridder, as a redshirt freshman, made my all-emerging team, and the other 2 were members of my all-underappreciated team at quarterback. Then we have Bijan Robinson, the exciting but somewhat controversial first-round pick because of how early he was picked. I do think they probably could have traded down and still landed him, but I could be wrong. Tyler Algier, that's a heck of a 1-2 punch. Algier is a little Alfred Morris-ish running back, but he's a guy who's capable, at least we know is capable of being a lead back because he did it. With Cordell Patterson, Mr. Do a little bit of everything, wide back. Caleb Huntley, they have a really good running back room. And then Carlos Washington Jr. is in the fight to try to make the team. Keith Smith at fullback, and then Clint Radakovich. I don't know if they're going to keep 2, but if they keep 2 fullbacks, which very few teams do, I think they'll just keep 1. They have Calais Campbell. Yes, that Calais Campbell, the friendly monster from Miami, who is now in what is probably his last NFL season, but who knows? A guy that will probably get some votes for the Hall of Fame when it's all said and done. I'm not saying he'll make it. I think he's sort of in that category with guys like John Henderson, another monster, though maybe not quite as lovable, who will end up being thought of as like first ballot Hall of Very Good, right? But a really good football player. They've got Taquan Graham, another interesting project behind him. Joe Gaziano, former Northwestern Wildcat, who did make my all-underappreciated team, with Alakale London after him, who probably doesn't make the team, or if he does, be a practice squatter. You've got David Onyemata, At nose tackle with Eddie Goldman backing him up, Carlos Davis. They'll probably keep at least 2 of those players. And Davis, maybe as a practice squatter. Grady Jarrett, man. Still going strong. Such a good football player. And not I don't think, fully appreciated by many people. With, shout out to my friend Steeler Fury, a.k.a. Velvet Films, a.k.a. Will, who was a huge fan of Timmy Horn. Well, your guy Timmy Horn is now learning from a great role model in Brady Jarrett and has a chance to stick around. And Albert Huggins. Huggins is another guy that maybe has a chance. I mean, once again, I'm assuming if they keep a total of 5 defensive tackles, he makes it. If they keep 4, he does not. Bud Dupree, another one of my guys. He made my all underappreciated team at one point when he was at Kentucky, and then, obviously by the next year he was appreciated. But really athletic guy, can be very productive, and if he ends up being your second best pass rusher, you've got a really good pass rush. I could expect their pass rush to be better this year. They've got Adekubu Ogundeji, and then backing him up, Zach Harrison, who they just drafted, and Ikana Inuichukwu. They do like Nigerians. But Ikana Inuichukwu is another college free agent, and he's got an outside chance to make it, once again, most likely practice squad. Then you've got Troy Anderson, the freak athlete, a guy who could play red. I mean, when I say Brian Urlacher-esque, physically, he's Brian Urlacher-esque. I'm not saying he's going to be Brian Urlacher. But literally, some of the things that Brian Urlacher did, played red zone tight end, wildcat quarterback. In fact, Urlacher didn't do that, but was a leading rusher at one point while he was in college. Just a tremendous all-around athlete, and he's learning to be a full-time guy at linebacker. I think he's going to be a star. Not a star, but a high-level starter. Michael Walker, I really feel good about him as a depth piece. Tay Davis and Andre Smith, probably the last one of those 2 guys are in a battle to see who sticks on the team. They've got Lorenzo Carter, who I liked coming out. I liked him more as like a 3-4, really a pass rusher, outside linebacker type, who occasionally puts his hand in the dirt on certain downs. And then Arnold Ibikiti, they got to find a way to get both those guys in the field, in my opinion, on the field at the same time. I don't like Ibikiti as a rotation player. I want him on the field about 50% of the snaps, and maybe he will be. I don't know. This is just a provisional depth chart. And then D'Angelo Malone, man, think about the pass rush package you could put on the field. So it's, 3rd and whatever. You put Bud Dupree, you put Lorenzo Carter, Troy Anderson, Arnold Ibikiti, and D'Angelo Malone all on the field at the same time. That's a handful to handle. This is going to be a better defense than people think. Then you've got, of course, A.J. Terrell. Nailed that pick. Darren Hall and Natron Brooks. Brooks is a college free agent who has a chance if he can make it as a special teamer. Then you've got Richie Grant, who I liked coming out of UCF at strong safety, with Jalen Hawkins, who I liked and still like. And Micah Abernathy's a guy that also has a shot to stick on the team, comes by way of Green Bay. Was a practice squatter. If he sticks, once again, it'll be for special teams. Then the big free agent signing, Jesse Bates at free safety. That is an immediate upgrade, obviously. I think Jesse Bates is a top 3 safety in the NFL. And while he's not perfect, he's, like I said, pushes the level of the room up. DeMarco Hellams came in this draft and is behind him. And Gafford also is behind him. So they're both backing up. And then you've got Lucas Dennis, who is probably, if he makes it, a special teamer. Then in nickel, you have Mike Hughes, another player I liked coming out. Clark Phillips, the 3rd, I think eventually is the future of that position, though. That's a guy that I think will be on the field in some of those 6 DB situations right out of the box, and eventually is a starter. And then you got D. Alford, once again, guy hanging around. In terms of special teamers, you now have Bradley Pinion, who is a very fine punter. Young Hova is still holding it down for place kicking. You now have Liam McCullough at long snapper. Pinion also is a holder and does kickoffs. And then punt returning Scotty Miller and Cordell Patterson, who's one of the best kick returners still, despite his somewhat advanced age for the position at least, is still one of the better at that position. So that draft class that they had in 2020, we'll just recap it very briefly. Terrell, right? I mean, at least a triple. You may call it a home run. Marlon Davidson, wah wah. And I had concerns about him once again for some of the things that we talked about previously, some of the same reasons. Matt Hennessy, I think he rounded into what he's going to be. He's a solid player who can give you depth, probably, like I said, at multiple positions. Michael Walker is another really good depth piece. Jalen Hawkins, a player I really like. Sterling Hofrichter is a guy that has, I would say, maybe even exceeded expectations. So that was I would say that they flat out missed on Marlon Davidson. Like, there's no two ways around that. But all the other players contributed, and Terrell was, really good. So I'm saying that's at least a B minus. Now, I'm not going to grade the 2023 draft just because it's too early. Taking Bijan at 8. If they had traded down, say, 6 spots, picked up some additional draft capital, we'd all be like, right, at least golf clap, right? Golf clap. But just flat out taking him at 8 just feels, he better be great. He better be Saquon Barkley with a little extra flavor for this to feel like the right move. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't know. Maybe. But he needs to be, if he's not one of the top vote getters for Rookie of the Year, this is not going to look like a great pick. Matthew Bergeron, I do feel like is a great pick. He's listed as a guard. I still think he can play tackle in the NFL, but we'll see. Zach Harrison, I'm not super high on Zach Harrison. Some people are. I think, once again, you're going to get a solid depth piece. I think he's going to be a rotational player. I really like Kirk Phillips III. I think in terms of pure value, I think he's their best pick. And I think if you get an initial starter at pick 113, that's a solid triple. DeMarco Hellams, I think he's a depth player, but he's picked 224, so you can't feel too bad about that. And then Javon Gwynn. If Javon Gwynn is, once again, you're a guy who sees snaps at both guard spots and things like that, I feel like you've gotten good value out of it. So, all in all, I think that they're headed in the right direction for the most part. I'm a little concerned about their depth at some positions. Their offensive line still, to me, I think that's really the middle measuring stick for how far this team can go. And I still wish they had a bit of an upgrade in one of their corner spots. I think could afford an upgrade. And I feel pretty good about the secondary otherwise. And then they could definitely use at least one more truly explosive, number one pass rusher. They have a really good depth of pass rushers, but they don't have one guy who's the guy, in my opinion. So that takes care of the Falcons, and we'll be rolling on to the next team tomorrow.